The 16-bit days were a simpler time. You were either a Sega kid or a Nintendo kid, and the only ones who had both a Genesis and a Super Nintendo were those lucky rich kids. Some of my personal favorite games of all time released on the Super Nintendo, and yeah, I was a Nintendo kid. One of the games I was fortunate enough to get to play was a big title called Secret of Mana. Released in August 1993 by Square, later known as Square Enix, Secret of Mana was an action RPG released at a time when turn-based RPGs were much more prevalent, and it was met with both critical and player acclaim, making high scores across most big-name gaming magazines at the time. The only game within its genre that seems to top it on lists of games is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. After that point, the Mana series continued to evolve, but never quite had the same pull as Secret of Mana did. Which is probably why a remake was created and released in February 2018. As someone who's played the original quite a bit, I felt it was high time to enjoy it once more, but this time with a facelift. How did it turn out? And how does it stack up to the original? We'll discuss these things and more in this review of Secret of Mana HD Remaster. Secret of Mana is an action RPG game that follows Randy, a human who accidentally discovers and becomes the chosen wielder of the Mana Sword. Once released, the barrier created to fend off monsters disappears, and it's up to Randy to travel to Mana Palaces to revive the sword to its former glory. The gameplay in Secret of Mana is very simple, centering primarily around a myriad of weaponry you discover along the way. As you use weapons, they level up, allowing you to charge them for more powerful attacks. This isn't that useful against lesser enemies, but very effective against bosses. There's some element of strategy to attacking, as you have a gauge that recharges between each swing. If you swing before you're at 100%, you do much less damage, so you'll soon find yourself listening for the audio cue to know when it's best to swing. The other two protagonists besides Randy are capable of learning spells, which unlock as you gain access to elemental spirits. Like weapons, elemental spirits level up as they're used, making their spells more potent. These spells are most useful if you know enemy weaknesses, but an early shallow mana pool makes conservation of MP for stronger enemies more important, especially since the game's primary MP restoration item costs 1000 GP a pop, and you don't earn a lot of GP for enemy kills. If you're looking to move quickly through the game, there's an option to dash, though this uses the weapon charge bar. Luckily, the drain seems to be lower than the original game, allowing you to dash longer and be prepared to fight faster. Really, the entire game's movement seems to be much cleaner than the original. One of the new things to the game is an autosave, which is a godsend for when you get distracted and forget to save at an end before a big fight. This will inevitably save you, especially if you're careless like me. Also new to the game are interactions between characters while resting at ends, which gives a little extra detail or exposition for the story or characters themselves. I'm not entirely sure if this is a good thing, since these interactions often fit characters into tropes that the original game didn't, but they're still nice additions overall. In terms of graphics, the backgrounds, enemy, and character models are definitely a step up from the original, but they have a sort of lazy, mobile-like art style that screams like they'd intended to bring it to smartphones after its run on PC. There is one good thing about these graphical changes though. Back in the original game, weapons only palette swapped as they were forged into stronger forms, but in this version, weapons have completely unique looks from form to form, both in the menu and while in the character's hands. As far as the music goes, there's two distinct versions you can choose from: the remake soundtrack, which remixes all the old songs, or the original music. I personally prefer the original music, which is untouched and sounds great, but the remake music might appeal to newcomers. The remake music is good, and it's clear whoever did it had love for the original's music, but tries way too hard to be unique compared to the original. One of the first things I noticed different about Secret of Mana, besides the graphics and music, was that bosses were noticeably easier than the original. In fact, it quickly became apparent that the entire game was adjusted to be easier, apparently due to a rebalance. This is great for enemies who can sometimes be really obnoxious to fight, but the bosses lack that satisfying challenge of the original. Giving us an option like easy for the rebalance and hard for the original would have been preferable. Speaking of enemies, early on they're sponges for damage until you have multiple characters attacking at the same time. Because of this, the first few hours are a bit of a slog between spending copious amounts of time on enemies while waiting for them to die and possibly drop items, and the game's exposition. The middle and end of the game are more enjoyable because the game leaves you to your own devices and exposition isn't as heavy. Also, the original didn't, at least to my knowledge, have any crazy bugs like this one. You can imagine my confusion when this occurred. Enemy models also feel like they've lost something in translation. While the backgrounds tend to look faithful to the original sprites, the enemies only seem to vaguely resemble their originators, like the person in charge of the 3D models decided to try to add his own flair to the game, and in doing so, they lack the charm of the original sprite work. As for the playable characters, they look great, but the NPC models look very bland. Weapons in the game have some unique but weird attack animations that weren't in the original. This takes some getting used to, especially if you're a veteran, but the longer animations at least seem to have some invincibility frames, so it's not as big a deal as it could have been as a result, but it still seems redundant. Certain kinds of in-game movements seem to have been recreated to try to make an authentic experience, but are more obnoxious now than they were back in the day. Combat is still unnecessarily slow, even with the rebalance, and some enemies take forever to die even after you've officially killed them. Worse than that, the game drops a ton of spells on you and almost all of them are useless. If you want your best spells to function properly, you must use them over 99 times to get to max level. This means you have to be choosy about the elemental sprites you level up, unless you're someone who loves grinding. The Secret of Mana HD Remaster, or Remake, or whatever you want to call it, is a pleasant frolic through an old classic, but the game makes a lot of changes where some are for the better, but mostly for the worse. As a result, it does nothing really meaningful for the original when it had every opportunity to do so. Long story short, there's a lot of wasted potential here, which is a shame because I had high hopes for a remake of one of my favorite 16-bit action RPGs. Even with that wasted potential, Secret of Mana is still Secret of Mana, so I'd recommend it for the nostalgia factor. Now that Secret of Mana is out of the way, Square, how about Secret of Evermore, huh? Currently, Secret of Mana is $39.99, which is a ridiculous asking price, and I don't recommend purchasing it while it's at that price point. Wait for a price drop, or better yet, dig through your couch for another $40 and pick up a Super Nintendo Classic for $80. Not only do you get Secret of Mana in all of its 16-bit glory, but you also get a ton of some of Super Nintendo's best games. You could also mod it if that's your thing, or just, buy a way cheaper Raspberry Pi. That's all, folks. Be sure to slash that subscribe button for more Chunky Beef, or join us on social media, links in the description below. Thanks for watching, see you soon.